Thanks for joining me. My name is John. This is the Christian Media Marketing Podcast and video show, and I'm grateful for you taking some time to hang out with me today. I hope it's going to be worth your while. I hope that what I have to share with you will be something that's a benefit to you, your ministry, and to the King and the kingdom that we serve. I don't know if you've ever been in a situation, but if you're a human being, and you probably have, where you think something and no matter what other people say, you're just convinced. And so you maybe, if you're like me, go out trying to find evidence to prove that you're right. And you're going to continue to look at things and trying to find that information. And then the question comes, well, what happens when we find other information? What happens when we find information that doesn't go with what maybe even used to be true? And this is the really interesting thing to this. You see, we take snapshots of time, whether we're on the mission field or whatever we're doing in life, just period. And that becomes our baseline. That becomes what is normal to us. But what if things change? And what if our baseline itself changes? What if the information that used to be true, well, it isn't true any longer? How do you handle that? How do you get that cognitive dissonance? And so information that just doesn't fit, that what I consider almost like a pebble in your shoe, what do you do with that kind of information? Well, when we are looking for information to confirm something that we already believe, this can lead to a situation that's called confirmation bias. And in confirmation bias, we're looking for information that confirms what we as individuals, or in many locations, what the group thinks that we are a part of. And so if it doesn't fit, we're just throwing it away. We're not actually examining and looking at information and forming new baselines and new ideas about stuff. And so it's something that is very much a reality that we have to face, that you do, I do, and the people that we are sharing with in digital engagement, that they will have confirmation biases as well. So I'd like to spend this time today with you looking through just what is confirmation bias, and then what are some of the things that impact it. And yes, religion is one of them, but there's actually a whole lot more. So let's dive right into it and look at all these different things that impact how we view the information that we come across every day. Let's take a look. All right, so confirmation bias itself may not be a term that you have heard before. If you're watching the video here, I've got a lot of written description. I'm not going to read them all to you, but just a lot that you can come to. And if you're listening to the podcast, well, yeah, feel free to go to our YouTube show and subscribe to that and be able to watch that. Sometimes it's just great to be able to see the information that I'm sharing. But for the most part, really, confirmation bias itself is really a thinking bias. It's a cognitive bias that comes about when we are looking at a set of beliefs or ideas or a hypothesis or anything that's going on, and we begin to think, oh, okay, well, this is the truth. And this is what is good information. And what comes about from that is that we actually disregard other information that might be more helpful. And so it impacts how we search for information. It impacts how we interpret that information, if we believe it's true or not, if it reinforces what we already think. And it even helps us remember the information, because sometimes we will remember the things we think are true, and we just completely forget the things that we think, well, that's not important or that's not true. But with confirmation bias, we may be missing out on some really important information. And for people in digital engagement, they have confirmation biases as well. And so when they see your Christian content, maybe they're searching for it, which would be great for like Google Ads or YouTube. But even if they're not, if they've never thought about it, what do they do when they see that ad talking about Jesus, or that video clip, or that opportunity to have someone praying for them? What do they do when given that opportunity? So confirmation bias itself then can impact our lives in a lot of different ways. It's our decision making. Do we do something or do we not do something? Do we click on that ad? Do we purchase that thing? Do we make this life decision? Do we believe this religious belief? Do we decide and really become critical of something and disregard maybe something we viewed before, all of these things can be impacted by our confirmation bias. And so it can also, in a negative way, continue misconceptions and stereotypes. It can hinder us from having real objective analysis, and it can hinder us from even really looking at things from that are contrary to what we believe and growing from it. And so we miss out on so many of these opportunities. So where does this come from? Where is confirmation bias reinforced in our lives? Well, one of the ways is just through culture itself. Cultural norms and values are what create this shared framework of belief that you and I have. Everyone has our cultural beliefs and value systems. And what ends up happening is that we tend to seek out information that aligns with our shared beliefs. So when we see something that we agree with, well, we find more of that because it reinforces even our group identity. So whether it's a small group or a bigger group, within a culture, we get reinforcement when we are conforming to what is the normal accepted beliefs and the normal accepted just norms in that society. So when something is normal, when it is culturally acceptable, when we adhere to that, when we do those things, well, then that's a positive. But when we don't, culture will look down on us. So this encourages this confirmation bias because we want information that our group or our society or our culture sanctions and agrees with. So that's one way, just culture itself, the norms and the values. There's also the stories that we tell. The cultural narratives and the stories that we share are many times shared through media itself, which is why digital engagement is so powerful. So whether it be videos or pictures or whatever, all of these media pieces and stories that we share shape reality, and they shape the way we look at reality, and they can create a bias for an individual or for even a culture to either accept information that goes with it or reject the information that contradicts the cultural history, the narratives, and the story. You probably know this. Oh, well, in our country, we are all whatever that might be. And so everything is viewed through that, and the stories are told in light of that. And any information and narratives and stories that don't fit, well, those can be disregarded many times. So this shared experience, which is what is so powerful of media, influences in a very, very powerful way. And so people are more likely to accept information that fits their cultural history. And if it doesn't, well, they just reject it. Another part of it is just group identity itself. And so how do we see ourselves with these cultural stories and these beliefs, with the media that we're consuming when it comes to digital engagement? How do people see themselves? Are they seeing themselves in this information? Does it fit with the group that they are a part of? So confirmation bias itself is strengthened when we take information that fits with our in-group. And then if it goes against the other groups that we are against, well, that's even better. And so people are looking for information. They're looking for their biases. This is why you have news stations that can literally look at one thing and come at it from two totally, completely different perspectives. The headlines are different. The stories are different. The video being shot is highlighting different things. And it's because partly that culture itself can create this us versus them mentality. And so we become biased towards information that supports our cultural group identity. And in essence, our superiority is what is in the internal parts of this that come about. And so when we are sharing information and when we are doing digital engagement, people will look at that from the group that they see themselves in. Now, what's interesting, if the group that they're in, they don't approve of, now all of a sudden there's an opening. There's an opening for them to begin to look at other things. We've seen this in, like, say the Middle East, when ISIS and Daesh was doing so many of the things, and they still do, but when they was first on the scene and was doing so many terroristic types of activities and so much that was going on, what you see are Muslims who are saying, wait a minute, if that's what that is, I don't want anything to do with that. And so they might call themselves atheist or whatever else. Well, that's where they're challenging their group identity. And digital engagement can be very powerful there because it's presenting itself, these stories and these alternatives, to the group that maybe they're not so excited to be a part of anymore. So group identity can impact our confirmation bias. Another one is just the language itself and the way we communicate it, both verbal and nonverbal communication. Colors we use, word choices, all of these things. I talked about this a few months ago about little things that can make a massive impact. But the language we use and the terminology used within a culture can frame information itself in a way that either gives people the idea that this is good or this is bad. So the words that are used, I'll give you an example. In the United States, when we start talking about taxes, depending upon who you talk to, somebody might say, well, we want a tax cut. And somebody else might say, well, I want tax relief. Well, it's really the same thing. But which one sounds better? Do you want a tax cut or tax relief? Well, relief is a word that sounds better. It sounds not harsh. It sounds soothing. I want some relief. I don't want a cut. Cut sounds hard. So cultural communication styles, things like high context versus low context, all of this, the word choice, even the emoticons that you use can affect how information itself is processed and whether or not it is confirmed and agreed with or discarded. High context cultures rely on implicit understanding, which can reinforce this existing biases. So really be thinking about your culture, where you're at. What are the words? What is the language? What is the style itself that people give? Another one, a big one actually, is educational systems and just how knowledge itself is transferred within culture. So educational systems within a culture often reflect and they actually reinforce the cultural values and belief systems that I talked about earlier. The content that's taught in the schools can then bias individuals towards either accepting culturally aligned information or rejecting it. And so there are certain authorities then that educational systems and knowledge systems they talk to and they look to as a source of authority. So it could be the elders in a society, it could be religious leaders, but whoever it is, those people, their views tend to be less likely to be questioned. When you're young and your teacher says something, well, you probably just accept it. And so this reinforces this confirmation bias that people can have when they're looking at information, especially religious and gospel information from our digital engagement efforts, right? So how is what we're presenting viewed by the educational, by the elites, by those in authority, by culture, by the beliefs, by the language, by the in-groups and out-groups, by the context? All of these things make a big impact. And then the one that you would naturally assume, just the religious and spiritual beliefs themselves of a society and of a culture. In places where religion is a very important part of what people do, well, this impacts confirmation bias. So when information comes about from, let's say, the New Testament, but the culture says, well, the Injil and the New Testament is corrupted. Well, then how do people look at that information? How do people process it? How do they come across it when they've been taught from their educational systems, from those in authority over them, from the language, from all aspects of culture that this cannot be true? What can we do in those situations? Well, there's actually some really powerful things that we can do. So I'm going to talk about those in the last part of this series next week, some ways that we can use some tools, some techniques to help people overcome their confirmation and their cognitive biases that come about from culture itself. How can we help people in our digital engagement to be able to overcome all of these challenges that I've been talking about today of just confirmation bias? You have them, I have them, and the people we're trying to reach have them as well. I hope that was a benefit to you. I hope that it challenges you to really spend some time thinking through the culture that you're operating in. And even if you have done this before, I would encourage you to go back and to just challenge some of your assumptions. Is this, whatever it might be, is this still true? All right. So look at things from educational, language, context, cultural, in groups, all of these things, and begin to evaluate your digital engagement, your messaging, the good news itself in light of all of these things. As always, I would love to hear from you if there's other subjects and things that you would like to be hearing about. If this is benefiting you, I'd love to hear from you about that as well. Please subscribe to it, share, tell other people about it, whether it's the podcast or the YouTube channel or both. We'd love for you to be subscribed to that. And next week, I'll finish this up talking about some ways that we can specifically craft our messages when it comes to our digital engagement and even just our responders themselves as they are responding to people, how they can best frame that good news so that it will be able to overcome the confirmation biases and cultural biases that we all have. Until next time, keep pressing forward. May the Lord bless your efforts for Him and for His glory. Take care. Bye for now.